What's going on, guys? A little impromptu live here. I'll get started in just a second. Let Facebook do its thing, but I wanted to hop on here and share something for a few minutes before I'm off to the gym here. Not sure how many people we'll have on the live, but give it just a few seconds for Facebook to do its thing. But no, hopefully everyone's having an awesome week. It's crazy that it's already mid June at this point. But that said, I'll dive into it and keep this super short, super sweet, super buttoned up. I know I always say that and then tend to go a little bit longer. But um, I shared this yesterday on my Instagram, and this is something that I see a lot. And what is funny too is one thing that we commonly hear, and you've probably said this before, like, oh my gosh, I know what I need to do. I just need to do it. I know what I need to do. I need to move more and eat less. I just need to consistently do that. And on half the equation, like, you're right. But what I've understood after doing this for 7 years, that there is really a big knowledge gap when it comes to health and fitness and what works, what doesn't, what drives results. And I wanted to share something because I've done 5,000 phone calls with people and worked with 1,000 plus clients and some very smart people along the way that have said, oh, I know what I need to do, but they continue to make this very simple mistake, which can be very costly and might be holding you back as far as losing weight goes. So what I was sharing yesterday on my Instagram is was catalyst by a conversation that I had earlier this week with a woman who had struggled losing weight for quite some time. And one thing that I commonly see is somebody will, and there's two kind of paths to this, but somebody might be religiously tracking their calories, trying to be in a calorie deficit and trying to lose weight, and they'll maybe take a class or they'll work out or they'll go for a run and they'll wear a tracker, right? Whether it's I use a Whoop band, maybe it's an Apple Watch, maybe it's a Fitbit, Garmin. I know there's, in this day and age, there's like 100 plus different trackers that you could wear, right? And even some classes, they'll have you hook up to like a monitor, like I believe like an Orange Theory, and then you can see like your calories burned on a screen, and they kind of make like a game, they gamify it, right? And what I'll see is people will be like, oh, I burned 500 calories, or I burned 700 calories, I burned 800 calories during my workout, and they'll add that back into their calories for the day, right? Like maybe they'll start out at 1500, but they're like, damn, I burned 800 calories in my group fitness class, so now I can have 2300 calories today and still be in a deficit and still lose weight. Or the other school of thought is people will just tell themselves, maybe they're not that person that's like religiously tracking calories or whatever, but they'll be like, oh, I had a really hard workout. I did a long cardio. So, I deserve a pizza tonight. Like that's how a lot of you will think. And it's not a good place to be when it comes to how you approach nutrition. So like, as far as the first example, adding calories back in, two very important things. Okay. So number one is there's a lot of variance in those trackers. There's never going to be a tracker that's like precise because there are so many different variables. There's no precise way to tell you how many calories your body actually burned in a given workout. There's just no way. And like if you want to test my theory, go to a gym, and if you get like on a treadmill or elliptical and plug in your information, your height, your weight, like you could go to one gym and do, say, the treadmill for 30 minutes, and it says that you burn 250 calories. You could go to another gym and enter the same information, different treadmill, and it might say that you burned 175 or 350, right? And you're doing the exact same thing. So there's a huge variance in that. There's a huge variance in the tracker. So, and that's a big deal in the sense that, like, hypothetically, say the second thing I was going to say is the human body doesn't work exactly like that either. But where this becomes a problem is because of that variance. If we're working with a woman, or I see a woman who's maybe 5'4", 150 pounds, who is pretty petite in stature, and she's off by like 300 calories, like her device may be estimates it really high and she's adding those back in, well, 300-400 calorie variable over the course of, months, if she's adding that back in, like that's a really big deal because there's less margin of error when someone is that small, right? So I see some people, really struggle with that. And like I said, I think there's two thoughts. I think people are really tracking to try to be in a deficit and they're adding it back in. But just the second thing, which is not a good approach or a real healthy relationship with nutrition, as far as like, oh my gosh, I did a really tough workout. I ran, I lifted for an hour, I worked out for 2 hours a day, I went for a hike. I deserve this like big meal, because typically you're overdoing it, and people like will reward themselves with food, which is a different conversation for another day. But the final thing I will say with that is, stop doing that. The trackers aren't accurate. There's no way. And those variances are like doing more harm than good as far as if you're doing that. And as I said, I won't go deep into this, but that's just not how the human body works. It's not that, as far as, and again, because the accuracy is the biggest thing. But that's just not exactly how human body works. Just because if you did burn hypothetically 500 calories doesn't mean that you necessarily can add those back in and continue to lose weight. Like, it's not that straight cut math, if you will. The final thing I will say too is keep in mind when when we work with a client and we set their nutrition targets, whether it's calories, their protein, macros, whatever, that's adjustable over time as your body changes. Things change when you start to lose weight, whatever. There's a lot of variables there, but like, when we set that and you work with a good coach or a good program, or you set your nutrition targets, keep in mind your activity is already factored in. Because if you go to any decent tracker, or you work with a coach, when we bring a client in, I'll just tell you from my perspective, when we bring a client in and we're setting their nutrition targets to begin with us, we're looking at many different factors. Their obviously their sex, their age, their height, their weight, what they do career wise, their activity level, how often are they going to work out, how often are they going to do cardio, their sleep, their stress. Like, we're looking, any like menopause or PCOS, like there's, depending on the individual, there might be 10, 15, 20 factors or variables that come into play as far as setting their nutrition targets. So when you set their nutrition targets, though, my point is like your activity and your exercise and what you're doing on a daily or weekly basis is already factored into where your targets need to be. Does that make sense? So you're like double dipping if you're adding things back in. So stop doing that. To give you a simple explanation with this, like, assume all else is equal. Like, if we have a woman that's, say, just in your head, a perfect twin, two 40-year-old women that are twins, that height, weight, everything is the same, but you have one who works construction and is on their feet, 8-9 hours a day doing physical labor, versus her twin that's an accountant, sits behind a chair for 8-9 hours, or sits behind a computer, 8-9 hours a day. All else equal, their nutrition targets are going to be different because of what the first one, as far as doing physical labor, like their activity on a daily basis compared to the accountant, right? So typically, again, all else equal, the person that has a physical labor job or is on their feet all the time is going to have a higher calorie target versus someone who is more sedentary, right? So just an example, but I feel like this is important, and you might be sitting there, well, duh, Bo, I knew not to do that. But like, I get this, question or in conversation with people literally probably multiple times per week. And I see so many people struggle, like, yeah, I'm struggling losing weight, I'm in a deficit, I'm doing this. And then kind of start to talk about things, and they're either doing two things. Like I said, they're either adding calories back in that they burned exercise wise, like, and they're seeing a Fitbit, like, oh my gosh, I burned 500 calories a day, so I can have like a 500 calorie meal at 9 p.m. at night because I burned 500 calories with my workout. No, it's not how things work. Or it's just, again, a conversation for a different day. But like, people will have a really good workout, they'll work really hard, and then justify or reward themselves with like a big meal that causes them to spill over on the calories that they need. As I mentioned, it's like, oh, I had a great workout today, I really pushed myself, I did all this cardio, I lifted, I did abs, like, I'm gonna have a big pizza tonight because I burned it off this morning. It's just, that's a very bad approach to have with nutrition. I'm not saying again, I'm not saying pizza is bad. I'm saying you to have that perspective with food that just because you did a hard workout, like you deserve, because oftentimes when people get into that mindset with nutrition and you're doing that like every Friday, Saturday, like, God, I crushed my workouts this week. I deserve a pizza on Friday night and I deserve, like a pound of sushi on Saturday night, whatever. Like, I'm not saying I love pizza, I love sushi, but like to be in the habit of rewarding yourself after difficult workouts more times than not, I would say 70, 80% of the time, when people have that approach, they tend to really overdo it and they eat way more than they should, but they justify it by how hard their workout was today or this morning or yesterday or whatever the case may be, right? So hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully that helped one of you stop making that mistake, because it does hold people back if you're doing that consistently. It's not how the human body works. And then, like I said, there's so much variance and variables depending on what you're using to track and the gym you go to, and like it's just, and the reality is if you're off 200-300 calories as far as you're guesstimating, depending on where you're at in this journey and your height, your weight, all those things that I laid out, that could be a big detriment to you, losing weight over the long run or making physical changes. So with that said, hopefully this was helpful. If you have any questions, just drop in the comments down below. I'll check them later. And we'll more than likely see you guys next week. Have a great rest of your week. Have a great weekend. We'll see you guys. Peace.